Hey, welcome to this episode on Father's Day. If you know a dad that's really stressed, or you have a dad that stresses you out and you want a stress management course, I just wanted to let you all know that I decided to do a flash sale for my stress management course. So it's Quantum Stress Management 21-day reset. And we're doing 50% off because I did this for Mother's Day. So I decided to do it for Father's Day. And you can still get in on that. You can just use the code DAD. So you don't have to be a dad to use the code. But if you are saying, oops, I didn't get my dad anything, or your husband or somebody, and you want to get in on that, the Quantum Stress Management course, this is a good time to do that. So check it out. And if it's resonating with you and it feels like this is a good time, then use that code because you've only got 2 days to use that code before it goes away. It's going away on Tuesday, but we may keep it around till Wednesday, but like Tuesday night, okay? So make a decision and get in if you want to get in using the code DAD at checkout, and it'll give you 50% off. So thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Happy Father's Day to those of you who are celebrating Father's Day today. And for those of you who are feeling sad today, sending you some love for whatever reason. Maybe you aren't close to your father or weren't close to your father or feel fatherless on Father's Day, sending you some love. Well, just sending everybody some love. How about that on this day? And I was going to just talk about fatherhood on Father's Day. And then I thought, what do I know about fatherhood? I'm not a father. I had dads. I had 2 fathers, so I know something about what it feels like to have fathers. But when I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about for this episode, what popped in my head was, yeah, I'm fatherless on Father's Day. But of course, I'm not fatherless. None of us are actually fatherless. There must have been a father that contributed to your creation, both creating you biologically, but then also, if you believe in God, I do. So, what works for me, and if this doesn't work for you, I don't mean to offend people, but you are listening to the Nourished Soul. And when we talk about soul, we often talk about spiritual things. And I believe in God, and I believe that we are all children of God. So, we all have a father, Father God. Of course, you could say that's like father, mother, creator, life force, energy, whatever. That all works for me too. But the point is, I ended up thinking, I really want to talk about fathering and how important fatherhood is, but also mothering. So, sorry, dads. I'm going to talk about mothering, which is what I know really well. The most important thing in my entire life has been being a mama to my 2 boys who are now grown men, 19 and 21 years old. But I absolutely adore these boys, and I take mothering so seriously. So when I started thinking about how important fatherhood is, because fathers are incredibly important in our lives. And I spent a long time. I started thinking about my fathers. So I have a biological father and I have a stepfather that adopted me. And I don't know why I always say it that way, but he was my stepfather for a long time. And then when I turned 18, I asked him if he would adopt me and took his last name, which of course he said yes. We were super close. He was definitely my hero in life. And I'm so, so grateful that he came along and my life got so much better once he was in my life. So I tend to think of him as my real, I just did air quotes there, my real father, even though I had a biological father. And for many years, I spent that time angry at my biological father and really blaming him for anything and everything that didn't go right in my life. And I've even a lot of my insecurities and the things that I was working on all through my 20s, even into my 30s, well, now too. Who's kidding? I'm still working on these things in my 50s, but really got into it in my 20s, mainly because I didn't want to carry a lot of the hatred and anger and baggage that was carrying into, well, my marriage, but also into being a mother. I was really motivated to do a lot of my own healing, a lot of my own work, because I wanted to be a mama and I didn't want to mess up my children any more than than any of us do. I mean, I figure, kids, a few years of therapy is good for everybody. But I have come to a really different place of respecting and appreciating my biological father because I think both of my fathers did the very best they could. And I think both of them loved me as best they could. But my biological father, I didn't mean to say but, and yet but my biological father struggled. He struggled in life. He really played the victim in this life. And I guess that was his soul's contract in this life. And so that's what he was playing out. But if it weren't for him and the experiences really of just, he was not a horrible human being by any means. And he tried really hard. And in some ways, he was really good to me, except that he was just an alcoholic and wasn't available and was passed out a lot of the time, didn't show up a lot of the time. But I keep using the word but, I'm not sure that that's the right word. And I learned to take care of myself when I was really young. I learned to cook for myself. And actually, my love of cooking, he was an excellent cook. And his mother, my grandmother, was actually really great. She was a great baker. She did a lot of baking. I'm not a baker, but I think she was also a good cook. And I think my love of cooking and cooking for people comes from that side of my family. And I do think, and my dad was a great dancer. He was a schmoozer, so he was really good at kind of the life of the party alcoholic. So there is that piece, but I also believe that he was the reason that I got into psychology. Of course, so many of us get into the field of psychology because we're trying to work on our or family of origin stuff and our own healing stuff. I'm no different. I was there doing the same thing. So I think those experiences early in life were really important. The painful piece of it, I think there was a time I was sitting in a restaurant. I was actually waiting on my stepdad, my adoptive dad. We were getting ready to go. I think we were going to a basketball game. I grew up in Atlanta. Hawks basketball game or something. And I was an adult. I was grown ish, young but grown. And I was meeting him for dinner and then we were going to that. And I was watching a dad with his daughter who was probably 18 or 19, and I watched as she walked in the restaurant and his face lit up. I mean, lit up. There was a twinkle in his eye, and you could tell how much he adored this daughter. And I had this deep sadness in me because I never felt that from my either one of my dads. I never saw that. I never felt it. So even though I think they both loved me and they did their very best, and even though my stepfather was absolutely my hero, and when I asked him to adopt me, and the reason I did that at 18 is I didn't want my biological father to have to give permission for that. And I really didn't want to hurt him, but I felt like my stepfather was really my real father. He stepped in and did an amazing job with me for having his own children and getting me when I was 9 and a half. I think yeah, I was just always really appreciative and loved him. And I loved my daddy too when I was little, my biological father. There was definitely a lot of love, but there was so much disappointment and so much anger. It just kept covering that up. And so after he died, my biological father died in his early 60s, I actually felt this real relief because I worried about him all the time. And so while I was sad for him, I was also relieved that I no longer had to worry. And you know how people are always like, oh, but you didn't get to have closure. You didn't get to say what you wanted to say. I could not say what I wanted to say to him, not because couldn't say it, because he couldn't hear it. He had lost so many brain cells that talking to him was like talking to a wall. He could not retain what you were saying. His short-term memory was completely eaten up. Well, maybe not completely, but it was pretty eaten up. And so when I did try to have conversations with him when he was alive, I didn't feel like they landed. And now that he was dead, I was like, he can hear me now. So I could have conversations. This is just what worked for me. Some people are like, okay, that doesn't make sense. May not worked for you, but it was working for me. And since then, I've been able to do a ton of healing and really actually forgive and appreciate him. But I just realized there was so much work to be done because every accomplishment that I would achieve, so getting my PhD, even and becoming mama, all of the things that I had wanted to do, I always had this cloud of, yeah, but I'm just the daughter of a drunk. And that was followed me for so long. It's still kind of, I can still kind of feel that, but it just doesn't have the same charge because everything is frequency. And I've worked on that limiting belief and that charge, getting rid of that charge. It's a whole different conversation. But how important are fathers, our father figures, whether they do it right, they do it wrong, they screw things up, what it doesn't really matter whether they have that their face lights up and they have that gleam in their eye when they see you, which is so beautiful. I love to see that. It's even if they don't do that, it's so important to have a father, and they push us in the directions, these relationships, these all of the relationships in our lives, but these really important relationships lead us on what is our life's journey, our path. And I'm grateful for that path. I'm very, very grateful to my stepfather because for so many reasons, I still feel so close to him and appreciate all of his wisdom that he shared. And I still feel like he's doing his best to share from the other side because I pray to him all the time, like, you have to help me, especially with these kids. Like, I'm, I think I've talked about that a little bit before, where I'm on my knees praying about something going on with a kiddo. And it's usually to my stepfather. And what's interesting about them, in case you don't know, you haven't heard me talk about them before, is they're both named Ron. So one was Ronald and one was named Ronnie, but they both grew up with the name and went by Ron as most of their lives. So having me as a daughter and having the same name is about the only thing they had in common. But it is kind of interesting. And so that's why I don't really necessarily use their names because that can get confusing too. Anyway, I just think that parenting is important and that our parents, whether they did that well, they didn't do that well, they left us with insecurities and hangups and limiting beliefs or whatever they did, still important. And what work would we have to do if we didn't have childhood stuff to work through? Even if it wasn't traumatic, everybody has emotional things that were stressful in their lives, things that create fear even today in your life. And that's what I've really been working on. Fear and the fear and love, and the bucket of fear and the bucket of love. So inside of us. So a thought will come up and I'm like, "Oh, that's a fear thought. That goes in the fear bucket. Oh, there's a love thought." And it's really surprising after all of these years of working on myself and all kinds of different therapies and retreats and all kinds of things, I'm still finding a lot is going in that fear bucket. A lot of the thoughts or feelings that are coming up belong in that fear bucket. So I've been doing a lot with radical self love lately, which is really interesting. And I'd like to say that it's easy, but it's really actually been challenging and messy. And I've been surprised at what I wouldn't think would be self love is actually self love. Boundaries have gotten clearer. Where I'm like, oh, that's a boundary. So something will come out of my mouth like an F bomb. Which, if you know me, you're not really surprised that there are F bombs coming out of my mouth, but I've really been dialing it back. I've been really paying attention to my language because language imprints on water and we are mostly water. So I've been really paying attention to that. So when it does come up, I realized like, oh, that's a clear no. That's a no. That's a boundary for me. I was trying to think of a specific example of something and I can't. There've just been a lot. I just remember the F bombs coming out of my mouth, not necessarily what was happening, but just paying attention to like, oh, that was a clear nuh-uh. I'm not doing that anymore. That's not okay with me anymore. And realizing how much is negative self-talk and really not very loving, critical. I've always known that I've tended to be critical and had a lot of work to do on that. But for crying out loud, in my 50s, we're still doing this, apparently. So I've been practicing this, just at least the concept of radical self love. And what came up this week in my own therapy, and I thought I'd share it here because I thought it was pretty amazing, is that I start going into in my head stories of like, is that really self love? Is that how it's supposed to be? Is that the soul's contract that would, and I can go off in this way that's very cognitive, right? As opposed to embodied. And what I've been realizing is that self love is actually an embodied experience. And so anytime I kind of go off, I let myself go off that. I look, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't eat sugar, like for crying out loud. I was going to use the word crying out, phrase crying out loud, I guess, today. Sometimes that letting myself just go, it's a discharging of just letting myself go down some weird rabbit hole that takes me out of my body and into just la la land of thinking about how the soul works and where is it. And maybe that's just the soul's journey and all of that sort of stuff, as opposed to really embodying it. And what I've realized is that when I'm actually embodying self love, there's a real it's like right up against fear. Fear and love are right up against each other, and it's just right up against it, but over in the love bucket, right? It's it's sometimes really subtle, actually, but and sometimes surprising, but also when you embody it, there's this feeling of freedom. And sometimes it's fleeting and sometimes it's lasting, but I'm working with this. This is what I'm working with. And you know, when you work with something, lots of opportunities and challenges come up for you to practice that. And that's what's been going on. So, and even on vacation, because especially on vacation, I get triggered pretty easily when I'm having forced family fun with my family, which is great. We're building memories, it's all good. But again, don't drink, don't smoke, don't eat sugar. Yeah, this past trip, I really, really, really wanted a flourless chocolate cake. And I'm not saying that you need to do this, but I know for me, that's a slippery slope. I know for me, that's an addiction that does not shake off easily. That then sends me into a spiral and it creates inflammation. So physically, it creates problems mentally, emotionally. And I wanted to be really present with the uncomfortableness and any negative self talk that was coming up, any of the things that were coming up that were triggering for me or were increasing my anxiety, or any if you, anxiety might be even a high word for it, just anxiousness or feelings of worry. I have a lot of that as a mama. So, as a parent, I think this is really important work that we do. And yeah, my boys are grown, but I'm still working on myself. I'm still really practicing this self love and I'm practicing sobriety for me. Like, what does it mean to be really actually sober, not just alcohol free, because that turned out to be pretty easy for me. But what does it mean to actually be sober? And the things that drag me down emotionally, mentally, and physically or create these spirals for me, like, how do I abstain from those so that I can be really present even in the uncomfortableness? Because what I figured out is in this embodied experience of self love is a present moment situation. If I start thinking about future stuff or go off on one of these thinking about the past, then I've left. I've left the here and now, I've left the moment, and now am I really embodying self-love at that point? My experience has been no, maybe you have a different experience. And how important this is for moms and dads. So I'm not a dad, so I don't know what it feels like to be a father, but I know what it feels like to be a mama. And I know what it feels like to be fully present, even in the uncomfortableness of parenting. And I know what it feels like to nourish my nervous system as a mother and how helpful that has been. And to be a mom of a child with chronic health issues and anxiety and panic attacks has been the most eye-opening, challenging, and gift-giving experience of my entire life. I've talked about it really openly. I feel like I've been open about I haven't really shared his part of it, but my part of having a child that's struggling and having, panic attacks at school, and I'm getting texts saying, "I just threw up, I'm having a panic attack," and, just what happens to my nervous system when that is happening for your child. This is something that I'd really thinking about helping other people now that we're enough on the other side that I feel like I can be helpful to people. That's what the stress management course is all about, by the way. Everything I learned to try and help him that helped me become more stress resilient and all of it is all in that course. But I've started really going, this is what I'm passionate about helping people figure out for themselves. And because I don't believe there's anything more important as a parent, as a mama, than doing my own healing work. So, baggage from the old, from anything from childhood to new stuff to nourishing my nervous system right here, right now. And practicing self love has actually not been natural. It's not been second nature for me. Maybe you had a different situation growing up, or you feel like it is just natural for you, but it's unbelievably freeing when I have those moments where I am embodying self love. And I don't necessarily mean, oh, I'm taking myself for a pedicure or I'm talking about the day to day, the way we talk to ourselves, our behaviors, the way that we nourish and nurture our nervous system. That is what I mean by self love. A lot of it's the self talk, but a lot of it is just behaviors that we have and the way in our language and the way that that language is imprinting on water and you are water, but also helping ourselves as nature. We are nature. We forget that. And so getting back to those basic things that help us thrive. So I just think being a parent, there isn't really anything more important in my mind from my life. I've done a lot of things, and if you're not a parent, that's you're obviously contributing. You have light that you're bringing to the world. I just really wanted to say that none of us are fatherless and that we actually have so much light and so much love to give. Whether you're a parent or you're not a parent, doesn't matter. You have light to share in the world, and that is extremely important that you nourish your nervous system so that you're able to hone that light, tend to that light, bring that light forth. And if you are a father figure in the world, happy Father's Day to you.